After a 6-week trial, Sydney businessman Abe Saffron was found guilty of conspiring to defraud the Commonwealth of tax. The trial had centred on allegations.
The 3-year sentence was unanimously dismissed. It's estimated that more than $1 million of tax was evaded in a 5-year period alone.
For half a century, Abe Saffron is the Vice King of Sydney. He controls the illegal gambling, prostitution and liquor rackets by bribing and blackmailing police and politicians. He's accused of arson and even murder. But like Al Capone, Abe Saffron only goes to jail because of tax evasion.
This man, my father, changed the face of Australia. There is no question that he did. He changed it completely. In the entertainment world, gangster world, everything. He changed everything. He is probably one of the most significant people in Australia's history, good and bad.
Australia's most notorious criminal band.
Some people said worse than Al Capone, Lucky Luciano and Bugsy Siegel combined. And he was in the beginning.
I don't think you can characterise most criminals as being the sort of 4x4 tattoo-covered thugs. It's the thugs, the ones who are in the front line, who are carrying out the deeds of those of the tacticians, you know, the Abes, if you like, who are more in the back room.
I knew it was shady. I knew it was illegal in some way, but I couldn't pinpoint it. I mean, he had a whole life, which is different.
There were varying reports. I mean, you know, some people said that he was on the fringes. Others said that he was immersed in it. Some would say that he was in the heavy stuff up to his eyeballs.
But then, as he didn't need to commit acts of violence and had other people doing it for him, or not necessarily killing people, but just, you know, beating them up or whatever, it was an element of fear. That's what it was.
All of the suggestions are untrue. Untrue, completely untrue.
Born October 6th, 1919, Abraham Gilbert Saffron is raised in Sydney's West by parents of Russian-Jewish heritage. He displays entrepreneurial talents from an early age, buying and reselling cigarettes and school textbooks for a profit.
He's a very astute operator, and he's also, of course, one of the first car radio thieves. Abe was managed to picked up and I think arrested for goods in custody of having one of the very early valve radios. So he was obviously a man who saw an opportunity fairly early on and went for it hard.
Before his 21st birthday, Saffron has already pleaded guilty to gambling and theft charges. He enlists in the Australian Army and Merchant Navy during World War II, where he runs a black market enterprise supplying contraband such as alcohol, cigarettes, and pornography.
Now, whatever the sailors wanted, he had available. And he partnered up with in each case, with the captain of the ship. The captain got a slice. Then he started a bookmaking business where he went to the track and was a bookmaker. And he always claimed that he lost everything in the book. He was a bad bookmaker. Well, nothing could be further than the truth. My father was brilliant at math and brilliant at business. By saying he was making nothing, he didn't have to pay taxes.
Cashed up after the war, he quickly accumulates a number of pubs, using family and friends as dummy owners to get around the law that limits any individual to just one hotel license.
I think it was 4 or 5 hotels. He would put it in his brothers and sisters' name, Beryl, Flora and Phil, and had it in, and him, of course. So he had 4 hotels.
But it's Abe Saffron's move into nightclubs that sees his empire and influence flourish. Within a few years, he becomes known as the King of the Cross, the seedy heart of Sydney's strip clubs and prostitution. And it all begins with the Roosevelt Club.
First time I met Abe, I was offered a job at the Roosevelt. The reason I wanted the job because they had the best looking ballet girls in Australia.
I was a dancer. I learnt a lot from the Roosevelt. It was a high-class nightclub, very well run, very strong doorman to keep the riffraff out. And we all had a great time. We met a lot of famous people that used to come there. You know, terrific.
Paradise. Paradise. If you took a girl to, say, the Roosevelt, they dressed to the nines, you know. And that was their night out.
Guys in lovely dinner suits, women in their finery, superb food, chicken in a basket on the menu, and wine flowed, provided you ordered it before 6 o'clock. You know, judges, politicians, lawyers, all that sort of jazz. Everyone was up there, enjoying it, even though it was slightly illicit.
Mr. Saffron used to come round to every table and introduce himself, even though I was only a humble student drinking a bottle of beer. He was polite and shook everyone by the hand.
Oh, we used to sit with lawyers and barristers.
Gangsters, doctors, showgirls, models, prostitutes, married women with their husbands. Sometimes they'd come in without their husbands.
Every night was fantastic.
And it was open till 3 o'clock in the morning.
It's a time when alcohol sales are subject to strict rules, including 6 o'clock closing, regulated prices, and post-war rationing.
In those days, you had to drink as much as you possibly could by 6 o'clock, and then it was all over. Abe did, and as a lot of other publicans were doing at the time, they just simply made sure that grog could be provided discreetly after hours in their hotels.
Saffron makes a fortune selling alcohol from his numerous pubs to patrons at the unlicensed Roosevelt at horrendously inflated prices.
And I remember, going down and getting bottles and bottles, carts of them, and we bring back to the nightclub, and the girls there would write down Mr. Robertson, Mr. Johnson, Mrs. so-and-so, Bill Watson, and that like that. Then they'd stick him on the bottle like that.
Which I think he charged £5 for. Well, that only cost 4 shillings to buy.
Wine and beer flow into the early hours of the mornings. Saffron pays police bribes to turn a blind eye to the illegal sales of alcohol.
The Vice Squad would come and see the show, have a meal.
Boys, enjoying yourself? Yes, mate. You just make sure you're glad.
And get their money on the way out. So, that's the way it was done.
It's not unlike Prohibition in America. It was an insane law. Prohibition in America breeded corruption. Well, the 6 o'clock swill was anti-Australian. So that bred corruption.
Eventually, the blatant illegal activities in the Cross cause a public outcry and result in a royal commission into the liquor trade. Abe Saffron is called as a witness and is caught lying about his hotel interests.
They did some digging and they found out that Abe was actually very heavily involved in a number of hotels, I think. So he came really unstuck. He lied and he got caught. He got caught heavily.
It's a major setback for his business, but it doesn't affect his private life. Abe's healthy sex drive sees him take numerous lovers, mistresses, and become involved in a sex scandal that makes front-page news.
Did you enjoy the show?
I mean, there was talk that my father was extremely well endowed and insatiable. That's the best way I can describe it. Insatiable, and had no moral compass whatsoever.
Abe realizes he needs powerful friends in high places to protect him and his expanding illegal operations. So he sets about building a network of businessmen, politicians, and police to achieve his goals. Abe Saffron has a criminal record for theft and illegal gambling by the time he's 21. He goes on to break the liquor laws to establish a flourishing hotel empire after the war. His love life also flourishes when he meets and marries Doreen Krantz.
Doreen was a darling. She just loved Abe to pieces. She loved show business. She was in charge of the concerts at the Roosevelt. She had everything to do with the costumes and the running of the show.
The newlyweds have a son, Alan, who later attends Randwick Boys High.
When it got around the school that the son of Abe Saffron was in the school, they started to tease me and they started to say, your father's a gangster, your father's a mob boss, your father's this, your father's that.
I mean, other kids just tore him apart. You know, his father was, you know, this Sodom and Gomorrah figure who was polluting Sydney with vice and crime. He took a, you know, really horrendous time in the school ground.
So I wasn't good at defending myself right away. And then one day I came home with a black eye again. The next morning, when I was going to go on the bus to go to school, a very large, I won't say tall, but large man came and said, I'll take your son to school. And he says, point out the boy who gave you the black eye. He walked over, he said something to the boy, God knows what, I can imagine. And then the whole thing changed. Everything changed at school then. Then I became a leper.
Around this time, Abe commences an affair with Rita Hagenfelds, and they have a daughter, Melissa. Abe is increasingly becoming more absent from the family home.
Well, his excuse was business. Of course, I later found out, probably around 9 or 10, that he had many mistresses and was in other homes, you know, with other women. He always had one regular mistress at least, and then he had many others on the side, but he had like one main one.
I never understood that, how a man could leave his wife and have an off time, and my grandmother would always be, oh no, it's fine, it's all okay.
Abe, I'd like you to meet Anastasia.
Anastasia?
Isn't she something else?
Sir Wayne, you've excelled yourself.
Oh, I thought he was gorgeous. And he was married. I was really silly, wasn't I? But anyhow, that friendship did last all those years. 55 years is a long time.
And they accepted pretty much their role in his life. All above board, they knew what the score was. And they were absolutely besotted with him.
It wasn't about the women, it was about using women. There was no real love per se. It's not the description of love as a conventional person would understand. He didn't have the immediate feeling for any one woman. His attitude was very simple. Take me the way I am, that's it.
Saffron is organising sex parties for close friends, politicians and crooked cops.
If you want a party, we can give you a party.
Yeah, a bit of S&M, you know, it goes a long way with...
That feature prostitutes, showgirls and homosexuals. One of the most notorious gatherings occurs at Palm Beach on Sydney's Northern Peninsula and involves his longtime employee, Wayne Martin. A woman involved in the orgy spills the details to the police, and Saffron and his cohorts are charged with scandalous conduct.
And of course, then the next thing, they'd arranged for the newspaper, the Sunday newspaper headline. 4 businessmen arrested on morals charges.
The charges are dismissed, but Saffron's reputation is tainted.
I mean, these days we don't do that sort of thing. But in that period, you know, it was sort of like the old throw your keys in and see who you end up with. Yeah, absolutely. And there are stories of Abe with girls brought in from various brothels and prominent Sydney businessmen. Completely true.
Remember the other night?
Saffron has easy access to prostitutes as the brothels are operating from the many buildings that he owns in the Cross. According to Alan Saffron, his father gained control of the prostitution racket at the end of a gun.
3 of them went into a Sydney brothel, supposedly the biggest brothel in town, and he said, "We're taking over." The guy in the brothel grabbed from the wall a shotgun, went to fire. My father shot the guy in the head, dead, right on the spot. I was told this by my father's enforcer. I mean, I can't have first. It's eyewitness representation. Well, the word got out, of course, and that he was the new boss. And it continued like that in such a fashion that no one else disputed it, and he ultimately built one of the biggest brothel empires, if you will.
Later, Saffron hires well-known standover man and career criminal Jim Anderson to manage the brothels.
That was last night.
So have you worked out the figures for the Venus room?
Yep, I've been looking at the books.
Every brothel that Jimmy Anderson operated on he got it off Abe.
Club takings, give him 75%.
For you?
Yeah.
No, too much, too much.
The view was that Abe was central to a lot of what was going on in relation to prostitution.
He ran a prostitution industry on the side out of his clubs, out of his nightclubs.
Anderson rented and paid rent to Abe. I don't think Abe ever told Jimmy that he couldn't run this or run that in the premises he was renting off Abe.
I know we're mates, but it's too much.
But he would not class that as sort of vice or prostitution. He would say, "I'm offering a sex service to my customers."
He didn't see prostitution and sly grog as being anything other than some sort of social construct.
And through it all, Doreen Saffron suffers the public humiliation of her husband's indiscretions.
I think she would have been a really nice woman. I only encountered her once at the Roosevelt, but you know, he had other girlfriends and they sort of got their share, and they didn't want to protect her at all and didn't care, didn't have any respect for her. And so she would have had a bit of a hurtful life.
She tried to commit suicide 3 times, taking overdoses of sleeping pills, and, you know. It's hard to say that she accepted it, because that would be a wrong characterization. I just guess she didn't want to fight it. It's incomprehensible to me. It's just, I've never been able to quite understand how someone could put up with that.
My grandmother was dosed on Xanax and all kinds of different pills that she was taking. She was always very happy, but completely out of it, clearly out of it. Just not caring. It's like sort of like living your life numb.
Anyone to have put up with what he did and what he was, and I hate to say this, it's a really nasty thing in a way to say, I am absolutely convinced that my father killed my mother. Broke her heart and caused her to stop the desire for living.
Alan believes his father betrayed him as well. He suspects his first wife, Susie, of having an affair with Abe.
I mean, my God, my own father with my wife. I mean, I don't want to believe it, but there were so many rumors about that. For every time a child was born, he'd give her diamonds and jewelry and everything else. There was the issues of suspicion about the birth of 2 of my sons. Can I substantiate them? Absolutely not. Did I sign the birth certificate? Absolutely. Do I love them? Yes, I do.
Abe Saffron finds himself back in the headlines, receiving even more bad publicity when the heiress and publisher Juanita Nielsen disappears in 1975. She's last seen in one of Saffron's clubs, and everyone believes she's been murdered. Abe Saffron rapidly expands his illegal brothels, strip shows, gambling clubs, sex shops and property development, predominantly in the King's Cross area.
There was an Abe Saffron establishment on every corner and every sort of 50 metres. He really owned that strip.
Ballpark, he would have had half the businesses in the Cross. And plus he also had a lot of real estate in the Cross as well, because he kept expanding his real estate holdings. He was one of the bigger landlords around town. So he kept ploughing the capital from his businesses back into buying more and more property.
Two of those properties were licensed clubs. And that was the All Nations Club in Bayswater Road and the Aquatic Club, which is near the Manhattan Hotel, just off Macleay Street. Now, both of these clubs were very well run and very successful clubs at the time.
But not all of Saffron's clubs are illegal.
There was illegal casinos in which he had a hand. He had places where they played baccarat. He certainly had sly grog shops where you could get alcohol.
Saffron opens the Staccato, which becomes the first legal strip club in Australia. He adds the Carousel Club and decides he wants the highly popular Les Girls. But to get that show, he has to play hardball.
Abe Saffron got the lease on the building. He had the rent put up that high that Les Girls couldn't pay the rent. And so they had to move. And in the meantime, he'd already had the show rehearsed. We'd already rehearsed to go in there. And we moved in there, I think it was 1973 or 74. So Eric Dare sold the name Les Girls to Abe Saffron. And it started again at King's Cross.
Louis and I came up with Dudley with the thing of, hey, they won't let us charge to go in to see a strip show that made the law. And Dudley says, well, why don't we beat the law like this? We'll give them a free show. And Wayne would give them a quarter of a chicken and a handful of chips. We'd charge, $2 for that and give them a free floor show.
But yeah, the strip clubs were in place and then Vietnam happened. That's a windfall no one could have predicted.
Saffron is making friends in high and indeed low places. He's linked to the gangster Lenny McPherson and multi-millionaire Sir Peter Abels. He socialises with the police commissioner Norm Allen, and perhaps most famously of all, Bob Askin, the New South Wales Premier for a decade, from 1965.
He came to the house, a couple of times as Premier. My mother made him lunch. I mean, it was a very open relationship. It wasn't like a hidden relationship at all.
He picked up some of his gambling debts. He certainly entertained him at his place.
As a matter of fact, it was the first real open relationship, him and the Commissioner of Police. They were really open in those days.
And Norm Allen financially benefited, which is not a great thing for a police commissioner.
High-profile visitors arrived weekly to pick up their bribes at Saffron's office at the Motel Lodge 44, just a stone's throw from the Cross.
Friday afternoon, usually about between 3:30, 4 o'clock, I would have to take up sums of money to Lodge 44, where Abe had his office at that time. I was never really sort of privy to the actual meetings. I was only taking cash from the businesses. Vinifrum, Bastille, Les Girls, VIP, Showbiz. That was basically rents up to there, which was $30 per gill per night. And as you had 23 flats, it would vary from between 5,000 to 15,000. The black cash, that is, which Abe then obviously was distributing amongst the gentlemen that he was meeting there.
I can remember plenty of times outside the Lodge 44, there'd be a car parked with a driver, whether it was a detective and the high-ranking coppers inside wouldn't have a clue, or whether it was city council, or whether it was members of parliament, wouldn't have a clue. Because when you went up there, yeah, listen, come back in 3 hours.
Abe was a great networker. He was a networker before we knew what networking was.
And one of the things that he had was unique is he was silent. And that was a perfect partner for police or government.
Abe Saffron knew most of the movers and shakers in Sydney. And I'm talking about in the political classes, in the law and order, law enforcement area, certainly in entertainment, the media, industry, and even the judiciary and the legal profession. He knew them all.
Like Sammy Davis Jr., for example, sold out performance in Queensland. Sold out, can't get in, $1,500 a ticket. And Grandfather rings on the day of the performance. He rings up, he goes, to Mr. Saffron, I'd like 6 tickets for this showing tomorrow night. Okay, Mr. Saffron, 6 tickets, right up the front row, stage. Impossible things like that.
It's Saffron's relationship with standover man James McCartney Anderson that has the most profound consequences.
Well, both my mother and me said to him he made a terrible mistake with Jimmy Anderson, but in a way he didn't. He had so many clubs. He needed someone of that kind of animalistic behavior. Nighttime business is a tough business. It really is. You get into a lot of problems, you get a lot of fights, you get a lot of stealing. He needed someone with an iron fist, and Jimmy Anderson was that.
I was regarded with a great deal of suspicion originally. I was reasonably fit. I wouldn't stand any nonsense. In those days, you used to get quite a lot of girls getting beaten up in the clubs, customers getting robbed. I put a stop to that. And again, there's a certain amount of respect as not to trifle with him.
He was a horrible, horrible man. Like, if anyone wanted to big note themselves, Jimmy did.
Anderson was a monster and shady character. He was just evil.
I remember one time he came to the dressing room and some of the girls were mucking up. And he pulled a gun out. And he said, you girls can play your game. He said, I can play mine. Your choice. And then just turned around and walked out. The girls didn't play up much after that, I can assure you.
I think that if Abe ever wanted to impress someone who was doing something wrong, that there may be trouble ahead, James McCartney Anderson was able to certainly menace them.
One woman who's menaced by Jimmy Anderson is Juanita Nielsen. She's campaigning against a multi-million-dollar King's Cross development in Victoria Street, being proposed by Saffron's friend, Frank Tiemann. She's also threatening to expose Saffron for blackmailing powerful people over their sexual exploits. Saffron's Carousel Club is the last place that the King's Cross publisher and activist Juanita Nielsen is seen alive. On the morning of July 4th, 1975, she meets the night manager, Eddie Trigg, to discuss the club advertising in her newspaper, which is called Now. She disappears, and her body has never been found. Jimmy Anderson is thought to be involved.
It was the most appalling crime. I think the police investigation into it was a joke. I've no doubt, and talking to Abe just before he died in later life, that he did knew a lot more than he ever told the police about what happened. I don't think he personally was involved.
In fact, he told me it was odd. When Frank Tiemann was on his deathbed, Abe said he went to see him to ask him how it all unfolded, and Tiemann refused to tell him. And Saffron was, I think, pretty upfront with that. I think Juanita Nielsen will remain a mystery.
The public attention that Juanita Nielsen's disappearance draws to Abe Saffron creates a rift between him and his once loyal enforcer, Jimmy Anderson.
I don't think the man could lie in bed straight. He's a puppet master. He thrives on corruption. Actually, he creates corruption.
Their falling out will eventually lead to Saffron's downfall when Jimmy Anderson, fearing for his own life, decides to become an informer. The King of the Cross is about to be dethroned.
Make yourself at home.
Thanks, Abe.
By the mid-70s, Abe Saffron has built up a group of powerful allies in business, politics, entertainment, and corrupt police.
You have a good time now.
One of his tools for gaining favours is blackmail. From the early days, he has two-way mirrors and peepholes installed in some of his clubs to take photos of those involved in sex acts.
The girls were in there serving them drinks, and there was nice lounges and everything, and of course his friends would go in there and other friends would look through the peepholes. They were compromised, so I think he blackmailed them. They were having sex and all sorts of nonsense, and they were being filmed. So Abe would say, well, you know, you do me a favour and I won't let this get out, sort of thing. That's the sort of thing that happened.
Cheers to a good night.
So I have no doubt that this was one of the things that Abe did employ. In a lot of cases, I think if you ever went to the archive of Abe Saffron, you'd find film, cans of film.
In my safety deposit and in my lawyer's safety deposit, I have photos that would turn anyone's head of sex acts with high-ranking politicians and police who are still alive today and who are still in the police and are still in government today.
Throughout his life, Saffron fights numerous allegations of bribery and corruption, some of them in court, but remarkably, none are proven.
He told me himself in later years that one of the things he got out of Sydney was he was having to pay too many people. He at one stage had most of the people in senior positions in the vice squad, the licensing squad, who policed what he was doing, the consorting squad, making sure that they left him alone.
Lots of police officers. I never understood why my family was so involved with police officers, my grandfather in particular, where he'd go into the dining room and he'd talk with them for hours and then he'd leave, and then the police officer would leave and they'd get into squad cars and drive off, and my grandfather would go, oh, I have to change this, I have to change that, and he'd be ringing on the phone, close the club tonight and open the club tomorrow, and, you know, don't do this now.
We used to see a lot of police come in during the day, collect their envelope from the reception while we were rehearsing. They used to just step inside the showroom and then step back outside.
Count out 300 for friends of the family.
A young Alan counts out the bribes and asks his father who the money's for.
He said, but I will tell you one of them is Bob Askin and one of them is Commissioner Allen. He said, the rest you don't need to know. So I knew. I put the money in the envelopes a lot of the weeks. I was right there doing a lot of his work, and I did the money for him.
So who's this going to?
And at one time there was like 20 envelopes. In other words, he was paying off 20 people. 20, that's a lot.
I paid possibly between $5 and $6 million over a 15-year period to Abe Saffron to pay the police and the politicians.
Saffron doesn't try to hide his relationship with one senior policeman, Deputy Commissioner Bill Allen.
I dropped him off at the police headquarters. I said, Abe, you're making it effing blue. He said, no, I'm just going out to see Bill Allen. I knew that Bill Allen was going to be the next Commissioner of Police.
I think it was unwise to allow Mr. Saffron into police headquarters. It's sort of waving a red flag at a bull, isn't it?
I aligned myself with the popular view in the police that Abe was an extremely dominant person around King's Cross who may have been involved in corrupting coppers, but certainly we knew full well that the coppers turned a blind eye to most of the businesses at King's Cross.
There's little doubt that Abe Saffron gets considerable favours from the New South Wales power players, but the tide begins to turn when federal authorities begin investigating accusations of his involvement in the drug trade.
I made a statement to Saffron that the one thing I would never be involved in was drugs, and that if I ever found out, to my satisfaction, that he was involved with drugs, then we were finished. I established beyond any reasonable doubt that he was one of the main bankers, I think would be the best word, involved in it.
This is the beginning of the end for Abe Saffron. By the 1980s, the National Crime Authority begins investigating what it describes as serious and incredible allegations against Saffron in relation to arson, fraud, bribery of police officers, and the supply of illegal drugs.
Probably Abe Saffron had more investigations into him than any other person in New South Wales in the post-war years. I'm talking about royal commissions, I'm talking about commissions by the federal government, state government, whether they were into sly grog, licensing, vice, drugs and everything else. It didn't stop him. And the reports came and went, Abe kept going.
But in the end, like Al Capone, it's tax that brings Australia's crime boss down. And it's Jimmy Anderson who betrays him.
The NCA used Jimmy Anderson as one of their witnesses, and I think Neville Rand once quipped that you wouldn't convict a dog on the evidence of Jimmy Anderson. But yeah, I have no doubt that there would have been some sort of little shenanigans here and there with tax.
The rocky association between the two will end up leading to the downfall of the king. For decades, Abe Saffron is king of the cross and all its vice without being touched by the law. Now, the newly formed National Crime Authority does a deal with James Anderson to give evidence against Saffron about his elaborate bookkeeping system.
Anderson was the architect of Abe's demise. Absolutely. And Anderson tried so many different ways to do it. Some were quite successful.
Anderson hands over a set of Abe Saffron's accounts that reveal how he's been defrauding the tax department.
Oh, they were the records of the girly places and gambling places, and I went through them, and you can't construct something like that. It was detailed information on who was paid what and so on, and they were certainly genuine. Well, the Income Tax Commissioner was certainly pleased to get them.
Anderson tells how Abe's clubs have two sets of books, official and unofficial accounts. The official book is used for taxation purposes. The black book includes cash takings that are never declared.
Now, of course, at that point, a lot of people say, oh, you know, lucky Abe. You know, he's been doing all of these other really shonky things, you know, throughout his life. And he's been pinged on something that is probably at the lesser end of the scale, when given some of the very serious allegations that were made against him.
Yeah, he was arrested at the Raffles Hotel, which was one of his establishments. And he was subsequently brought back to Sydney to face the charge in relation to tax evasion. Always carried on like a gentleman, never a cross word. Accepted the fact that he was under arrest and came quietly.
Saffron is arrested in November 1985 and he's charged with tax fraud and 12 counts of making false declarations to the tax department. He denies all the accusations, but after almost 2 years and 2 aborted trials, he's found guilty and is sentenced to 3 years. Saffron's new address is Long Bay Jail.
Phony accounts were used over a 13-year period starting in 1969.
Oh, the first few days were very hard on him. All the photos and the humiliation of having to take off his clothes and strip and things like that. That was the most disturbing for him.
It was a traumatic shock. I was bewildered, and it was only due to the kindness of other prisoners who attempted to comfort me in the circumstances I was in that I was able to bear with it. And then after a few days I realised that it had happened. And
I went out to visit him a few times. He was as happy as Larry, always a smile.
And the boss of the jail, first of all, gave him the laundry, which had been difficult, and they weren't commercially minded. So he was given the job of taking over the laundry and making it a viable business, which he said I thoroughly enjoyed. Every day was a challenge, and he turned it from a loss-making concern to a hugely successful operation in a reasonably short period of time.
I mean, he'd be in the courtyard and there'd be all the people around him, and he'd be like, Mr. Saffron, we'd like a cupcake, like a, dinner tonight would be steak, like, he'd be sitting there in his cell, all the people would be sitting in the mess hall. He'd have a phone in his cell. Yeah, he'd be doing business as usual in the cell.
when you're talking within the prison system, no, I wasn't given any special privileges at all there.
Most famously, while behind bars, Abe Saffron organises the lay girl dancers to come to the jail to perform for the inmates. He even orders takeaway Chinese to make it a real celebration.
I think he was the king of Long Bay. He went without very little. Anything he wanted, he sort of got, including a drag show. Yeah. And of course, the press the next day was headlines, Abe Saffron gets drag show into Long Bay Jail.
Who else but Abe Saffron could be in the slammer, be in Long Bay Jail, and then organise a party when you're being convicted of being a tax cheat, and have about 100 prisoners there, and have a great night of entertainment going on for several hours? Only Abe Saffron.
In the end, Saffron serves just 17 months of the original 3-year sentence.
He says, Alan, do you think I was upset about going to jail? I said, well, you seem to be. I was there. You took the impression that you would never go down. He said, that was the impression I gave to everyone. I already made the deal, so they wouldn't investigate me any further.
And I know that there were certainly many efforts to nail Abe Saffron in relation to things that were a lot more serious than that for which he was ultimately convicted.
Any comment, Mr. Saffron? Came to a point where if they continued to investigate deeper, I could have been put away forever. He said, but I reached a deal with the highest level of people.
Of course, when Abe went to jail, Jimmy Anderson thought he was kingpin then and thought the cross was his. It didn't last long. When Abe came out of jail, Jimmy Anderson went to the Philippines to live.
After his release from jail, Saffron faces a bribery charge involving the disgraced Deputy Police Commissioner, Bill Allen. It's dismissed, but he loses a ruling on what he owes the Taxation Department, and he fails in his various attempts to regain his liquor licenses. However, Saffron does win a defamation case against a newspaper that described him as Mr. Sin.
Mr. Saffron took the Sun to court and won. He told me he hated it. He's a man who shows no emotion at all, but he actually looked angry when he came to my chambers and said, I've been called Mr. Sin. It really upset him.
Abe Saffron's empire keeps expanding after his release from jail. He becomes one of the country's most successful property developers. But too often to be a coincidence, buildings he owns burn down.
If he couldn't get property rezoning or he couldn't take down a building in order to build a new one, suddenly that building would vanish, and it'd be vanished by fire.
Jimmy Anderson got burnt in one. I don't think he got out the door quick enough, and It exploded and got burnt. Very seriously burnt all down his back. Or there'd be little fires, but enough to close the place down for 3 months or something to renovate it.
The arson side of his operation was never investigated fully. I don't believe there's a single case wherein he was caught, charged, prosecuted and convicted of these offences, but they happened. But what is interesting, that the insurance industry, after half a dozen of these, gave up almost insuring Abe Saffron properties.
The fire at Luna Park, which claimed the life of his 13-year-old son, Jonathan.
The most damaging allegation of arson is that Saffron is linked to the Luna Park ghost train fire in June 1970. Tragically, 7 people are killed, including 4 Year 7 teenagers from Sydney's Waverley College. Saffron has a business interest in Luna Park.
Now, I asked my grandfather years later, were you involved in this? And he goes, look, my interests in Luna Park were varied. I had interest in the land up to a certain point. I had video arcade machines in Luna Park, but he had no involvement at all in the fire.
It was more likely that this was a rival who was trying to either get his hands on it or stolen money from it. Abe got anxious about the amount of money that was being lifted from the place, and the person to hide their theft of money from it somehow torched it.
No matter how Abe Saffron is ultimately remembered, he undoubtedly changed the face of show business in Australia.
He brought out entertainers such as Frank Sinatra, the first time this had been done in Sydney.
He had nightclubs, he was providing entertainment to tens of thousands of people that was otherwise not there. He was brilliant, he should be credited for all of that, and I'm proud to be the son of that man who did that.
Abe Saffron suffers a heart attack while on vacation in Israel in 2006, and he returns to his Potts Point home, adjacent to his beloved King's Cross. He initially recovers, but 2 months later he's admitted to St Vincent's Hospital with food poisoning and symptoms of pneumonia.
He opened up to a lot of stuff that he did. Never violent acts, but he admitted that he had brothels. He admitted that he ran the after-hours drinking. Now, he denied it to everyone, but the fact of it is he opened up to me. And I actually recorded some of the things.
After he was released from hospital the first time, and they told him that you might have to have a chair for the rest of your life, that was unacceptable. And I know he went back to that hospital, to die.
On September 15th, aged almost 87, Abe Saffron dies, and 3 days later, his funeral service is held. Saffron's fortune is estimated at between $20 and $30 million. The will provides $1 million for each of Abe Saffron's 8 grandchildren, although the major beneficiaries are his longtime lover Terry Kazik and his love child daughter Melissa Hagenfels. His son Alan receives the comparatively modest sum of $500,000.
My father treated me terribly in his will. Terribly, terribly, terribly. Worse than anyone. Worse than the assistant to his secretary. The sister. She got more, I believe, than I did. And this is someone who's not even family, for crying out loud, just because she happened to be the sister of his current mistress.
Abe Saffron, in my view, will be remembered differently by different people.
I know there's a lot of jealousy in the world, and I'm thinking he would have got a lot of that because he was attractive and successful and wealthy and charming, because there aren't many people that have all those qualities, are there? And he was self-made.
Saffron was a hard-nosed businessman. Saffron didn't give you a buck unless he thought there was a bloody good reason for it. One comment I do remember quite clearly, he said, all I've ever wanted to do is be remembered fairly. That was pretty much summed him up.
His ability to corrupt the system and use it for his own ends really did a lasting damage to our system of justice.
I mean, he was the King of King's Cross. It was a very reputed, it was a name that was adopted to him, given to him, King of King's Cross.